Welcome in, everybody, to another deep dive.
Hmm.
Today, we're going to kind of go back in time a little bit and talk about something that's, I think, really fascinating and important. It's about the Upper Sioux Agency State Park in Minnesota. And as always, we've got a pretty crazy stack of research here. You know, we've got news articles and historical records, even some YouTube videos from experts and outdoor enthusiasts.
Yeah, it's really interesting because we're not just talking about, just a park closure here, right? It's really about the deeper meaning of land, especially for the Upper Sioux community who, just recently had this land returned to them after, decades of advocating to get it back.
Okay, so I guess for those who might not know, like the very basics, Upper Sioux Agency State Park officially closed on February 16th of last year, 2024. So yeah, no more hiking trails, campgrounds, can't even really access the rivers through there anymore unless you're coming in from a different public access point. So I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, why was such a drastic measure taken?
Yeah, and that's where the history comes into play, right? This wasn't, a typical park closure because of budget cuts or, something like that. It was really the result of a long and determined effort by the Upper Sioux community to reclaim this land that holds, immense historical and spiritual significance for them.
Right. Yeah, this land was like right at the heart of the 1862 U.S.-Dakota War, which is a really tragic chapter in American history.
Yeah.
You give us a little context here, like what led to this conflict?
Well, it's a complex story, but in essence, the Dakota people had been systematically dispossessed of their land through a series of treaties that were often broken or manipulated to benefit white settlers. So, they were confined to this narrow reservation along the Minnesota River, which was just, a fraction of their original territory. And even on that reservation, they faced, hardship and exploitation.
Yeah, one of the historical records we were looking at from the Minnesota Historical Society said that, like, the rations that were promised to the Dakota people by the U.S. government were often withheld, and that led to, like, starvation and desperation.
Yeah, it was a really dire situation. And in August of 1862, that desperation kind of boiled over, and a group of Dakota men driven by hunger and frustration, they killed 5 white settlers. And, this incident was tragic, but it needs to be understood in the context of, years of this mistreatment and broken promises. So it ignited a conflict that quickly escalated into a full-blown war.
Right, and the U.S. Army then, responded with force.
Oh, absolutely. The conflict lasted for about 6 weeks, and while there were acts of bravery and compassion on both sides, the ultimate outcome was devastating for the Dakota people. The U.S. Army had, superior numbers and weaponry, and they ultimately defeated the Dakota and drove them from their homeland. Yeah,
an article we read in the Smithsonian Magazine said that after the war, over 300 Dakota men were sentenced to death by a military tribunal, and 38 were hanged in Mankato. It was like the largest mass execution in U.S. history.
It was a deeply traumatic event, and the repercussions are still felt today. Thousands more Dakota people were forcibly removed from Minnesota and sent to reservations in other states or to Canada. And, this displacement shattered families, communities, and cultural traditions and left deep scars that have taken, generations to even begin to heal.
And that Upper Sioux Agency site, the land where the state park was later established, that was right in the middle of all of this.
It was. It served as a hub for the distribution of those promised rations, which, as we talked about, were often withheld. And it was also the site of significant violence and suffering during the war. So you can imagine the emotional weight that this land carries for the Dakota people.
Yeah, one of the experts we watched on YouTube, he said, imagine your ancestors dying on this land, and then decades later, it's turned into a place where people have picnics. Like, that's the kind of complex emotional landscape we're dealing with here.
Yeah, and it really highlights this cultural disconnect that existed for so long. The decision to establish a state park on this very land in 1963, while perhaps well-intentioned, it now feels incredibly insensitive to the Dakota people's history and trauma.
Yeah. It's almost like building a playground on a battlefield.
It's a stark comparison, but it gets to the heart of the issue.
Yeah.
For the Dakota people, this land isn't just a place for recreation. It's a site of mourning remembrance and a deep spiritual connection to their ancestors.
And for them to have to pay an entrance fee to visit the graves of their ancestors on land that was taken from them in the first place, that just adds insult to injury.
Yeah, it's a stark example of the power imbalances and historical injustices that have plagued the relationship between the U.S. government and Native American tribes for centuries. And it really underscores why the return of this land was so important for the Upper Sioux community.
So let's talk about how that land transfer actually happened. From what I've read, Chairman Kevin Jensvold of the Upper Sioux community played a pivotal role in this whole decades-long effort.
Yeah, he was absolutely instrumental. He spent nearly 2 decades tirelessly advocating for the return of the land. He was navigating bureaucratic hurdles, raising awareness, and building relationships with state officials.
He was determined to right this historical wrong.
He was. And it wasn't just about legal processes or paperwork for Chairman Yensvold and the Upper Sioux community. It was about reclaiming a piece of their identity, a chance to heal from generations of trauma, and to assert their sovereignty over land that is rightfully theirs.
One of the news articles mentioned that in 2021, a major highway leading to the park State Route 67 had to be closed because of unstable ground, and they said the repairs would be too costly. So it essentially cut off access to the park from non-tribal land. And that seems like it might have been a turning point.
It was. It kind of forced the issue in a way. It brought renewed attention to the Upper Sioux community's claim to the land and made it more difficult for the state to justify keeping the park open.
Right, so it's almost like this unfortunate incident created a window of opportunity for the land transfer to finally gain some traction.
It did. And Chairman Yensvold, along with other tribal leaders and advocates, they seized that opportunity. They continued to push for the return of the land, and their efforts finally paid off.
So in 2023, the Minnesota legislature passed a bill authorizing the transfer of the park back to the tribe. That was a landmark decision. It was the first time Minnesota had returned a state park to a Native American community.
It was a historic moment, and it received support from both sides of the aisle, which is pretty remarkable in today's political climate. It speaks to the growing recognition of tribal sovereignty and the need to address past injustices.
I'm sure there were people who opposed the transfer, though. Change can be difficult, especially when it involves something as, beloved as a state park.
Yeah, there were definitely some concerns raised, particularly about the loss of recreational opportunities for the broader public. But ultimately, the state recognized the moral imperative of returning the land to its rightful stewards.
It sounds like there was a lot of negotiation and collaboration involved to make this happen.
It was a complex process, but it's a testament to the perseverance of the Upper Sioux community and the willingness of the state to engage in meaningful dialogue and ultimately do the right thing.
So on February 16th, 2024, the park officially closed, marking a new chapter in the story of this land. It's the end of an era, but also the beginning of something new.
It is. It's a powerful reminder that history is not static, that the past continues to shape the present, and that reconciliation is possible even in the face of deeply entrenched injustices.
So we left off talking about this historical land transfer and the closure of the park. And I'm really curious now, what is the Upper Sioux community planning to do with this land, this place that holds so much meaning for them?
Yeah, that's the question a lot of people are asking. And it's interesting because they haven't really rushed to announce any grand plans or development projects. They've really emphasized taking their time listening to the land and engaging in a process of healing and reflection.
Yeah, one of the articles quoted Chairman Yensvold as saying, they've waited 168 years to get this land back, and they're going to take their time and decide what they want to do with it. That really stuck with me.
It did me too. It speaks to the depth of their connection to this land. It's not just about economic gain or tourism for them. It's about reconnecting with their ancestral roots, honoring the memories of those who suffered and perished on this land, and figuring out how best utilize it for the well-being of their community.
Yeah, in one of the YouTube videos, Chairman Yensvold talked about the land as a place of holocaust for his people. And he uses that word very deliberately to convey the magnitude of the trauma and the need for healing to occur.
Exactly. And that healing is going to take many forms. There's the emotional healing of the community, of course, but then there's also the healing of the land itself, restoring it to a state of balance and harmony after years of being managed as a state park.
Right. It really makes you think about the different ways that people view land and its purpose.
Yeah.
For a lot of non-native folks, a park is a place for recreation, for, escaping into nature, for having fun. But for the Dakota people, this land represents something much more profound.
Yeah, there's definitely a deeper spiritual connection there, a sense of interconnectedness with the land and its history that goes beyond, simple leisure or enjoyment. For the Dakota people, this land is a living entity, a source of identity and cultural continuity.
Right. It's a really powerful reminder that our relationship with the land is shaped by our cultural background, our values, and our experiences. And it makes me wonder how those different perspectives might inform the Upper Sioux community's plans for the future of this land.
Well, I think it's safe to say that whatever they decide to do, it will be done with a deep reverence for the land and its history. They've already spoken about creating spaces for remembrance, for cultural practices, and for connecting younger generations to their heritage.
That's exciting. What kinds of things do you think they might create? Could there be a cultural center or a museum, a place where people can learn about the history of the Dakota people and the U.S.-Dakota War.
Definitely. That's a possibility. They might also choose to restore some of the native prairie and woodland ecosystems that once thrived in this area, creating a space for ecological restoration and traditional land management practices.
One of the YouTube videos showed this beautiful stretch of the Minnesota River that flows through the former park. And the speaker was talking about the abundance of wildlife, the scenic bluffs, and the potential for developing ecotourism opportunities.
Yeah, I could see that happening. Maybe they'll create guided canoe trips or hiking trails that incorporate storytelling and cultural interpretation, allowing visitors to experience the land in a new and meaningful way.
Sounds like they have a lot of options to consider. And I'm sure they'll be weighing the needs of their community with the desire to preserve the natural and cultural integrity of the land.
It's a delicate balance, but I have faith that they'll make thoughtful and informed decisions that honor their ancestors and create a legacy for future generations.
So while the Upper Sioux community is taking its time to determine, the best path forward for this land, what about those of us who enjoyed visiting the park for its recreational opportunities? Yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of people wondering what's going to happen to those.
Absolutely. The closure of the park has undoubtedly created a void for outdoor enthusiasts in the region. But the good news is that the Minnesota DNR has been actively working to create new recreational spaces to fill that void.
Oh, that's good to hear. So they launched this initiative called Upper Sioux Agency State Park Recreation Alternatives, and they've been engaging the public to gather input and ideas.
They have. They've held public meetings, conducted online surveys, and even created a dedicated website where people can share their thoughts and suggestions. It's been a very transparent and collaborative process.
So what kinds of ideas have people come up with? Are there any specific plans in the works yet?
Well, there's a wide range of ideas on the table. Some people have suggested expanding existing parks in the area, like Lackey Pearl and Camden, adding new trails, campgrounds, and other amenities.
Okay, so those parks are already pretty popular, so expanding them would certainly provide, more recreational opportunities. But do you think there's enough land available to create something truly new and different?
That's the question, right? Finding suitable land for a new state park is no easy feat. It needs to have the right mix of natural features, recreational potential, and accessibility.
And it needs to be available, of course. Land acquisition can be a complex and lengthy process, especially in areas where, property values are high or there are competing interests.
Exactly. But the DNR is committed to exploring all options. They're also looking at the possibility of acquiring land along the Minnesota River to create a new water trail with canoe launches, campsites, and interpretive signage.
Oh, I like that idea. The Minnesota River is such a beautiful and underappreciated resource.
Yeah.
And it can be a major draw for, paddlers and outdoor enthusiasts.
It really could. And it would be a great way to connect people to the natural and cultural history of the region. They could paddle past the site of the former Upper Sioux Agency, learn about the Dakota people's connection to the river, and experience the beauty of the surrounding landscape.
I'm curious, though, how they plan to balance, the desire for recreation with the need to protect the environmental and cultural sensitivity of the river corridor. It's a delicate ecosystem.
It is. And that's something the DNR is taking very seriously. They're working with environmental groups, tribal representatives, and other stakeholders to ensure that any new development is done in a way that minimizes environmental impact and respects the cultural significance of the area.
One of the articles mentioned that the DNR is also considering developing more trails for hiking, biking, and horseback riding, connecting existing parks and trails to create a larger network of recreational opportunities.
Yeah, that's a great idea. It would allow people to explore a wider area, experience a diversity of landscapes, and potentially even create economic benefits for communities along those trails.
It sounds like the DNR has a lot on their plate, but it's encouraging to know that they're actively working to create new recreational opportunities for the public. And it'll be interesting to see how these plans evolve over time.
It will. It's a reminder that change, even when it's difficult or disruptive, can create opportunities for innovation and collaboration. And in this case, it's also an opportunity to reimagine our relationship with the land, with history, and with each other.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the historical injustices that led to the park's closure, to the Upper Sioux community's vision for the future, and the DNR's efforts to create new recreational opportunities. It's been a journey through time, emotion, and some pretty complex issues.
Yeah, it really has. And I think what strikes me the most is how this story kind of transcends the boundaries of a single state park. It speaks to these broader themes of land ownership, cultural identity, and our collective responsibility to address, the legacies of colonialism.
You're right. It's not just about Minnesota. It's about, the ongoing struggle of indigenous peoples across the globe to reclaim their ancestral lands and to have their voices heard.
And it's about us as non-native people taking the time to listen, to learn, and to understand those perspectives. It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of our histories and working towards a more just and equitable future for everyone.
One thing that I've been thinking about a lot throughout this whole deep dive is like the educational opportunity that this situation presents. The closure of the park, while it's undoubtedly a loss in some ways, it also opens up this space for re-education, for telling a more complete and truthful version of history.
Absolutely. It's a chance to move beyond those simplistic narratives that are often presented in textbooks and popular culture and to really delve into the complexities and nuances of the past.
Yeah, one of the sources we were looking at, an article from the Minnesota DNR's website, mentioned that they're exploring ways to incorporate the region's history and cultural heritage into those new recreational spaces that they're developing.
That's a really promising development. Imagine, instead of just, a typical park experience, visitors could gain a deeper understanding of the Dakota people's history, their culture, their connection to the land.
Right, they could learn about the treaties that were broken, the forced displacement, the resilience, and the ongoing efforts of the Upper Sioux community to heal and rebuild.
Exactly. It could become a place of learning, reflection, and reconciliation, a place where people can connect with history in a meaningful and transformative way.
Yeah, I'm envisioning interpretive trails with signage that tells the story of the land. Maybe even a cultural center where visitors can interact with tribal members, learn about traditional practices, and hear firsthand accounts of the community's experiences.
I love that idea. It would create this amazing space for dialogue, understanding, and hopefully empathy.
And that education can extend beyond just the physical boundaries of the former park, too. This story prompts us to examine our own understanding of history, to seek out resources and perspectives that challenge our assumptions, and to engage in meaningful conversations with indigenous communities.
Right. There are so many avenues for further exploration. The history of treaties and their impact on indigenous communities, the land back movement, the ongoing efforts of tribes across the country to revitalize their languages and cultures. It's a vast and fascinating world just waiting to be discovered.
Yeah, I know for me, this deep dive has sparked a real curiosity to learn more. It's
Yeah.
made me realize how much I don't know and how important it is to actively seek out diverse perspectives and to challenge the dominant narratives that have shaped our understanding of the past.
Absolutely. It's a lifelong journey and one that requires humility, open-mindedness, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our history.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the story of Upper Sioux Agency State Park, I think it's important to kind of circle back to our listener. We've given you all this information, all these different perspectives. Now, what does it all mean for you? What are you taking away from this experience?
Well, I think the story compels us to think critically about the meaning of land, not just as a resource for recreation or economic development, but as a place that's imbued with history, culture, and spiritual significance.
It challenges us to ask ourselves, whose stories are being told, whose voices are being heard, and how can we be more mindful of the impact our actions have on others, particularly those who have been marginalized or dispossessed.
It's a call to action in a way, to be more informed, more engaged, and more responsible in our relationship with the land and with each other.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we're all connected, that our histories are intertwined, and that the choices we make today will have ripple effects for generations to come.
I hope this deep dive has sparked a curiosity in you to keep learning, to keep exploring, and to keep asking those tough questions. It's only through continued dialogue, education, and a willingness to challenge our own perspectives that we can create a more just and equitable future for all.
Well said. Until next time, keep diving deep.